Good evening. And before we begin, I just remind you to silence your cell phones or other devices. And welcome to tonight's Keese School program. I'm Rhoda McKenzie, a member of the Keese School Curriculum Committee. And tonight's speaker is Norm Wolf. Norm and his wife, Teokara, are villa residents here at Asbury. Norm graduated from Denison and Ohio State Universities, and he served a career in the Air Force as an attorney and procurement officer. His postings were on both coasts, in Oklahoma, and overseas in Thailand and Turkey. Norm's passions are playing pickleball, woodworking, and especially sailing. He sails wherever he can. Locally, he sails with the shallow water sailors, mainly on the coastal waters of the Chesapeake. Norm and Teo vacation annually in Estonia, where Teo's parents were from. So while in Estonia, he participates in a sailboat event called the Finnish Raid, R-A-I-D, in the Finnish Archipelago National Park, part of the Baltic Sea waters. This unusual and exciting experience is the source of his talk tonight. He will give us an overview of Viking ships and show how the heritage of the Viking Age is being preserved. So let's welcome Norm Wolf.
Thank you, Rhoda, for that kind introduction. Welcome, hello. And like Rhoda mentioned, I go to Estonia for this event, or while I'm in Estonia, I participate in this event. It was in 2005 that I was first invited to participate in this Raid Finland. The unique thing about this event is although people would term it a sailing race, it's a sailboat race where you're both allowed to sail and to row, and at the same time, much as the Vikings did in their ships. We do this in shallow draft boats, much like the Vikings did. And during that event, we also stayed at a Viking tourist village, and that began my interest in Vikings and their boats. Before I go on, I guess we should answer who were the Vikings. And they were a seafaring people, mostly from Norway and Sweden, or from Norway and Denmark, some from Sweden. But the term Viking was not one they attributed to themselves. Viking really is a part-time profession, and that profession is raiding or warring. Most of the time, these folks were farmers, fishermen, traders, but when they went Viking or raiding for plunder or vengeance, they were called Vikings by their victims. But present day usage is to use Viking as a collective noun for all these people. So that's what I'm going to continue to do. So when I say Viking, it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing something bad when I'm saying that. The Viking Age is usually considered to have begun around 800 AD up to about 1050 AD. Of course, there's some slippage on either side. And these distinctive boats, you can see a little bit of an outline there. They used for trading and transport, and of course also for their warlike activities when they were raiding. And these people also did have something in common. They had a culture that worshipped the Norse gods. And of course, since they did go Viking, it raises the question, why did they do that? Why fight? Well, one of the reasons is their religion attributed great honor to a person who died fighting. If you died with a sword in your hand, you were pretty much guaranteed to ascend to Valhalla. Another reason is for loot. And they were helped in this regard by the Christians in the British Isles and elsewhere who had a tendency to gather gold and silver together in their churches and churches and monasteries, which made raiding all the much more easy by having it all in one place. And on these raids, they would also capture slaves, either to be sold or used or ransomed. And later on, they even started capturing land to be farmed, so they would settle there. You can see another picture of a typical Viking boat. But they really traveled far and wide, and this abbreviated picture shows you some. You'll notice to the east, we've learned from DNA and archaeological evidence about these travels. And to the east, you can see they went through present-day Russia, all the way down to the Black and the Caspian Sea. To the west, they went all the way to Greenland by hopscotching to the Shetlands and the Faroes and the Iceland Islands onto Greenland. And now we know they went on to Labrador and Newfoundland and Canada. So they really got around. The first Viking ship that we've found in the modern age was discovered in Gokstad, Norway. They think it was they think it was built in around the 800 AD, sometime in there. It was unearthed 1,000 years later in 1880, and it was used as a burial ship, probably at the end of its life too. It had the skeletal remains of one human. It also had skeletal remains of dogs and fowl and horses and grave items like jewelry, weapons, and food. It is 78 feet long, 17 feet wide. It had 16 oar ports, or rowing positions, on each side, which would indicate a crew of 32 rowers plus 2 helmsmen. And it was pretty well preserved because it was in these cold northern muddy waters. And here's what it looks like, this Gokstad ship looks like after removal from the ground in 1880. And you'll notice it's in pretty good shape for having been in the ground for 1,000 years. And of course, the Norwegians have given it a much better home now. It's today located in Oslo in the Viking Ship Museum. The Viking Ship Museum, as some of you have already told me, is conveniently located in Oslo, near the Kon-Tiki Museum, and near the Arctic Fram Museum, and near the Maritime Museum. So if you're into boating, you can get it all in one day. This one's a little smaller. No, as I said, 78 feet long, 17 feet wide, crew of 34. It could carry about 70 men if it was on some kind of raiding or military operation. And the thing that's unique about these things is they're shallow draft and lightweight. There's no ballast keel. If they need ballast, they just put big stones in the bottom of the boat, which of course are easily removed. One of the nice things about if you're going to attack a place that doesn't have a wharf or a dock, you can pull it right up on the beach. So it doesn't need these don't need harbor accommodations to come to land. And there were several replicas of this made. The first one was named Viking, built in 1893 and sailed to the USA for Chicago's Columbian Exposition in 1893. And it's still there in the Good Templar Park in Geneva, Illinois, which is west of Chicago. And there have been several other replicas built, which I know some of you have seen. There's one in Moorhead, Minnesota. There's one in Ramsgate, England. There's one in Iceland. There's one in Vancouver, British Columbia. And someone mentioned to me before the lecture they'd seen one somewhere else. So they're popular reconstructions. And then there was another ship discovered. I don't have the date on this. It was called the Oseberg ship. Norwegians in the audience will criticize my pronunciation. It was also a burial ship and discovered in Norway. It's in better condition. It was only 70 feet long and 16 feet wide, so slightly smaller, but similar to the Gokstad ship. But one of the distinguishing features of this one is it's got more decoration. You'll notice the curlicues on the bow, and there's a similar one on the stern. And there's also some carving, a little tough to see, carvings in the wood. So this is the one that's used more often if someone wants to show a copy of it. And this, of course, is also in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, along with some others. And this is another view, maybe one that you've seen. It's used as a trademark by the Wooden Boat School in Brookline, Maine. And they put it on T-shirts and hats and stuff like that. And this one is also the one that's most often used to depict as a model. And we have a model up here on stage. And I've got a picture of it here because it's kind of small on the stage to see. This was made by my villa neighbor, Carl Erickson. And it shows the construction detail, like the lap strakes, which I'll talk about in a minute because that's a unique feature of these boats. The sail and rigging, the sail decoration, the decoration on the boat, the shields on the boat, the fact that there are shields there and that the curlicues are on the bow and stern show that it's probably geared for going raiding. Those things are removable, and when they were using the boats for transport or trading, they would remove those so as not to frighten their potential customers. Now I want to show you, this is a short video that shows some of the construction. Let's hope it shows, yes, here we go. This is modern day reconstruction, and the cartoon will show, the animation shows how those planks fit together. And they were nailed together with iron nails. They'd punch a nail through and then hook it over. And this type of building is called lap strake. It's also called clinker built. There were no skeleton and ribs. As ships progressed, they started building them with ribs and a little bit different construction method. It's double-ended, pointed at each end like a canoe. And pine was probably used for the other parts, like the spar and the horizontal spar and the mast. They were square-rigged, which you'll see more in a minute. One sail hung from that horizontal yard. There's supposed to be a picture up there. These could sail about 60 degrees off the wind. You can't sail directly into the wind. You have to go this way and then that way. And these sailing ships could go about 60 degrees. Now, a modern racing sailboat can go closer to the wind, as we say. It can go about 45 degrees. So this way and this way. So a modern sailboat could probably go to windward faster than these. But these had the advantage. If where you were trying to get to is straight to windward and there wasn't much wind, they could row. They had 34 oarsmen to get themselves there. These were initially built for speed, so they were kind of narrow, and after about 1,000, they became broader for cargo. In Estonia, we were at the Museum to the Coastal Swedes in Estonia and found this replica Viking boat, which I think was built only a few years ago. And a boat this size, 30 feet, would have been used like a family car. Remember, these folks lived in Norway on the fjords. There was no road system. You got around by boat. This could carry probably 10 people comfortably, along with some cargo, maybe some cattle. And of course, the thing I really like about them is you could row them or sail them or both. And along those lines, I'd like to talk now a little bit about experimental archaeology. This means you get a design and you construct, in this case, a ship as close to the way the Vikings did it as you can, kind of like you saw those guys in the last frame doing. And then you sail it, like you think the Vikings did, and see if you stay upright. The example you think of is in 1947, the Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl had theories about Polynesian migration, and he built and sailed the Kon-Tiki. I think you remember that, to demonstrate these theories. And the Drake and Herald is a Viking-style ship, and it's another example of experimental archaeology by another Norwegian. And I have a video here. It's narrated, so you're not going to hear me. It's narrated by a crew member who's also a naval architect. See if we can get this one to work. There we go.
With the sail, it's very sensitive to shifts in the ballast or shifts in the center of gravity of the ship. She won't tack if it's wrong, and she won't fall off if it's wrong, and like it has to be perfectly balanced to sail well. It's very fascinating that the Vikings figured this out, actually. I think the Vikings, they built their ships from bottom up. You lay your keel and then you start building planks on the sides of the hull. This normally was done by an experienced boat builder, and he would just look at the lines of the ship and see if it looked correctly. And by each plank you add, of course, it has to have the right shape. It's really an art. They could actually build really well sailing ships that way, that could cross an Atlantic just by looking at the curves of the hull. Draken is a really good ocean-going vessel. She's a great sailor. Her bow is very full, so she lifts up on top of the waves, and it's almost like she's flying rather than sailing through them. It's beautiful.
Sometimes people think it's easy with only one sail, but to tack and jibe and do all the maneuvers and reef sail, it's very, very hard work. It takes all 34 people to hoist the sail and so on. It's 1.5 ton you hoist. You can't do anything alone. It's too heavy.
Well, they sailed it to
So
North
you work
America about
together
10 years ago.
and help
And it's
each
been
other.
floating
That's
around
the only way to
as
do
a
it.
traveling museum around the United States and Canada for the past 10 years. They took it to Misty, Connecticut, where she has been for the last 7 years. And this past summer, she was taken back to Norway. And if you're interested, she opens June 8th of this coming summer. Now, I should mention something about navigation, although a lot of this is speculation. How did they navigate? Because we know they didn't have a magnetic compass. Of course, they did not have GPS. But the traditional methods that have been used by earlier people are the ones listed here. Clouds, difference between clouds that are over land and clouds that are out over water. There's a difference between land birds and sea birds. If you're at sea and you start seeing land birds, you know land is somewhere close. And interestingly, fresh water. As rivers cascade down into the oceans, the water doesn't immediately mix with the seawater. It floats out over the heavier salt water sometime for tens of miles out there. So if you're out and detect fresh water, you know that land is whatever direction that water is coming from. And the sun, during the day, the sun is a good navigational tool. And there is evidence that the Vikings knew how to find the sun even if it was an overcast day. There's evidence that they were aware of sunstone or polarizing calcite, which is a semi-transparent stone that has a polarizing quality to it. And I've tried to figure out how they did this, and there's a couple of different explanations, but apparently if you know how, you can use that polarizing feature and tell within a couple of degrees where the sun is on the sky on an overcast day. And of course at night you could use the stars, especially the North Star, and also where the star meets the horizon, where that particular constellation meets the horizon, you would have known approximately what direction that was. And of course, the last and easiest one is stay close to land. I'd like to mention how we're remembering the Vikings today, because it really has become quite an interesting topic. My first introduction after I started getting interested in this was in literature, a series of books called the Saxton Stories, 13 historical novels by Bernard Cornwell. And if anyone's interested, they're at the Montgomery Public Library. And of course, there's lots and lots of other books. There's TV and film. The Internet Movie Database lists 424 titles that talk about the Vikings. There's museums, particularly in Scandinavia. They have dedicated museums to the Vikings. And other places where Vikings were, the big museums have rooms or displays dedicated to Vikings. We have theme parks, and I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. We have Viking boat reconstruction, which you have seen. And we have Viking-like boating events, like the one I participate in, and you'll hear more about that in a sec. One of the big publishers that we know about is the National Geographic, and those of you who get the Geographic remember last year this was one of the special issues. And I have a book down there by the National Geographic, published about 10 years ago. It's called Vikings. It's yay thick. I didn't get all the way through it yet. I mentioned my first sailing rowing event. In 2005, we stayed at a Viking theme village. This was at Rosala, Finland, an island out in the Finnish Archipelago National Park. And there's the Viking Hall. And the Viking Hall, it was a common home. It was a family, home, and communal living. Here's the interior, and this was our B&B for one night. You see the cubicles on the far wall. They're about 6 by 8 feet, and that's where we slept. And there's 2 levels there. I was fortunate enough I didn't have to climb the ladder. The dining room tables and the fur-covered chair or benches are in the foreground. And I've stayed there twice, actually. We stayed again about 6 years later. And we eat there. They don't give us Viking prepared food. They give us modern food prepared in that kitchen beside the, you can see the door beside the bearskin on the back wall. They did provide us with a Viking. Here's our Viking. He does not have his sword and armor. And along with the building I had just shown you were things like a blacksmith shop and other little buildings that had displays and so forth in them. They have 2 Viking ships now. Unfortunately, I did not see either of those when I was there. But if you want to dress up as a warrior, that is available. There's a fierce warrior we had with us, the grandson of one of our participants. And there's lots of contests and so forth. They have an axe throwing contest, a bunch of other stuff that makes it an enjoyable place for a family to have a vacation. Not to be outdone, all the other Scandinavian countries have Viking villages too. Denmark has a number of them. Sweden has a number of them. Denmark. This is Denmark. This is the tourist village of Roskilde, about 30 miles west of Copenhagen. It's open year-round. You can see it's got several structures there. They have 3 excavated Viking ships, and they've reconstructed a couple more so that you can row or sail them yourselves. They encourage group participation. And Sweden has at least 4 major sites. I don't have pictures, but I'd like to mention them. There's one in Birka. You can get to from Stockholm. The one at Storholmen is an open-air museum, and apparently quite a big one. Has 23 buildings. Fotoviken Open Air Museum Village likewise is big with many dwellings to look at. And then the Roque rune stone, which is not a village, but is the biggest rune stone that they know of that has carved in it these rune letters. And that's the background of this slide. That's the rune letters on that stone, which are pretty easy to see, but apparently pretty tough to translate and interpret. And in addition to these types of things, they have historical associations that conduct Viking markets and Viking reenactments and other things like that. Now I want to show you another ship that has been unearthed. This one was unearthed in Gieseling, Denmark in 2015. It's only 25 feet long, so it was not a warship. It was estimated to have been built in about 1130. The neat thing about this is after they got it out of the ground, they made plans of it, and they constructed one to be sure it would work. Here it is, and it does work. At least it looks like it's sailing okay. But then they made the plans available open source on the internet. And a friend of mine named John Harris of Chesapeake Lightcraft got these plans. Come on, John. There you go. And built one, and he's sailing over on the Miles River off the Chesapeake right here. That's John at the helm. Chesapeake Lightcraft builds kit boats. They cut out the kits from plywood and send them to you with everything you need to build a boat. It's mostly kayaks, canoes, small sailboats, stand-up paddle boards, and the like. But he's now offering this one as a kit. I talked to him a week ago, and he said that a group has already bought one, and he knows that they're already building it. So maybe we're going to have the Chesapeake Bay populated with Viking ships someday. Now, the event I participate in, we call Raid Finland, and the thing I particularly like about it is it's a sailboat race, but you're allowed to row. Or, if you want to look at it another way, it's a rowing race and you're allowed to sail. Those of you who have either rowed or sailed competitively know that you can't do both at the same time. If you're sailing, you cannot be caught paddling or rowing. That disqualifies you, and the reverse, of course, is true of rowing. But on these raids, we do both. And that's particularly helpful in the Finnish archipelago because of all the islands. If you're sailing behind an island, that island is very likely to steal your wind. And suddenly you're becalmed and the sail is sailing limp. Well, you just hop on the oars and row through it. The other time that it's particularly helpful is if your destination is straight into the wind. Rather than tack this way and that way, you put out the oars and sail straight for your destination. If you're rowing at about the same speed that you're sailing, except when the winds get pretty strong. You know, these are small boats. So suddenly, frequently that straight line is a lot easier and a lot faster to get to your destination than the tacking back and forth. These raid sailing events have become popular. In addition to the one I participate in Finland, there's one in Scotland, there's one in Poland, there's one in Venice, there's at least one in France, at least one in Canada, and at least one in the US. And here is on my 2005 raid, there were 21 boats, and there was a boat builder from Victoria, British Columbia, who actually brought 2 boats and a cinematographer, and he made a 1-hour video for marketing purposes. And you're not going to get the whole hour, but here's 2 minutes.
For a lunch stop on the small island of Yaksholma. Behind us, demonstrating tremendous off-wind capability and aided by oar power, was the Yol Osla, followed by the Yol Millie and our old nemesis, the Vitanen. John and Laney on the Gannet were also making good time row sailing along.
I don't see the sails very full.
Wim and I still led the fleet under oar power as we cruised under the Grand Holman Bridge.
That's the narrator. They're going under a bridge and didn't know if they would clear. It's really a pretty place to sail.
Out in front, as we stroked along with sweat running at our eyes, we led the fleet until the end, when the wind gods smiled on the Yol Osla, and Wouter, Petrie, and Jean-Pierre slipped across the finish line a few boat lengths ahead of us.
Now, after my 2005 experience, I had my own built boat, plywood, not lapstrake, and I have a model of it down here. My crew, Tom from England and Andres from Estonia, are rowing. Tom is in the blue, Andres is in the yellow life jacket, and we had Rosie from Australia steering for us. We had a situation where the rest of the boats had to go around the island, and we rowed straight up this narrow channel. We were at the back of the fleet when they started around. By the time we got down that narrow channel, we were in front. So the rowing really paid off in that case. And when we stop for the day, we stop in cabins, tents, private homes, whatever the organizer sets up. And if you can't find an island with that kind of accommodations, a few times he has rented this Baltic Trader as a mothership for meals and sleeping. This kind of boat was actually used up until the 1950s to transport lumber to Denmark and Germany. There are still 6 remaining in Finland that have been converted to take passengers. They've converted the cargo holds into accommodations. And they're rented out as needed. And there are similar ships still preserved in Sweden and Denmark and Norway. Yeah, I'm okay. I thought I'd show you a small section of this Swedish-Finnish archipelago that I talk about. The green sections and dots, those are all islands. So it's really a sailor's paradise. The red lines are roads, and the blue lines are ferries. Where we went for the Viking village, Rosala, is at the bottom there. Can you see it? Yeah. And it can be reached by cars and ferries. If you follow the red and blue lines, you find you can get there with a car. The nice thing for small boat sailors for the archipelago off of Sweden and Finland is that it's pretty shallow. About 40 feet is the maximum depth, and most of it's more like 30. This means that the big ships, like the ones that are going up into Stockholm, can't really go anywhere except in a dredged channel. So as long as we avoid the dredged channels, we avoid the ships. That's not like the Chesapeake. You got to watch out for the big ones on the Chesapeake. As I was doing my research for this, I found this website called Follow the Vikings. And I put this up here for the interest of those of you who might be interested in knowing a little bit more. Because if you go to this website, and the way you find it is you just ask Mr. Google for Follow the Vikings, and he'll take you right here. You get a page that looks something like this, and every one of those little dots, whether you're a Norwegian or an Icelandic or a Swede or whatever, you can check the dot and it'll call up a thing like that in the middle for additional information. You click on that and it gives you a whole bunch of additional information. Really kind of a fun page to surf if you want to know more about the Vikings. That's all I have. That picture, of course, is my boat in a very shallow draft berth. That's what my talk has been about, these shallow draft Viking boats. And Viking culture through the reconstruction of their boats and through TV and movies and books, and Viking tourist villages and archaeological sites, and events like I participate in, celebrating the Viking style of boating. Thank you. Sorry? Sure, questions. I can't guarantee the answers. For those of you who are interested, we have Carl's model down here in the plastic case, and we have my construction model. Now, Carl's model is really quite nicely built. My construction model is something you put together when you get this sheet of plans and you think, you know, before I cut any plywood, I really want to know what I'm doing. So you cut out the cardboard thing and you kind of glue it together and you say, well, I don't like that. Maybe I do this different. So you unglue it, glue something else in. So it's not intended to be a display model. It's intended to be an instructional thing for while you're building. Yes?
I'm interested, I saw the oars that were being used on the boats, but could you tell us a little bit about how large an oar would be on those bigger transport boats?
Well, they're really quite small. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. That's the one I use on my boat, and it's about 9 feet. It's 275 centimeters. You have to do everything in metric in Europe. So I would guess they're probably at least 15, 16 feet long. Now, they leave the section up where you're rowing from pretty heavy, so they make them so that they're balanced. So, you know, you're not having to push down or lift up. They're balanced, and that's what most rowing boats do today, too.
So, like, the big ones, like the ones that are like warships on there in the Viking times, how would they get on the cargo there? Because it looked like it was like so packed with people. They wouldn't be moving.
Well, if it's packed with people, they're only carrying weapons. Their swords, their shields, and the people to operate them. If they're on a cargo mission, they probably don't have 70 people on board. They probably have a minimum crew, maybe 10 at most. The fewer crew you have to pay, the more profit you can get from your cargo. So I would guess that they have a lot fewer people when they're carrying cargo.
Could women be Vikings?
Lots of speculation about that, lots of speculation. They think one of the burial sites that they have found, I was just reading about this the other day, they've analyzed the single human figure that was there, and it was a ship burial, so it was a very important person. It was a woman. So, you know, modern day depiction will show women Vikings in warrior uniforms. They didn't leave a good written historical record, so we really don't know. I would guess not many women, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few who rose to prominence.
Could I just add one other question? How did they, didn't the timber have to be cut so that it curved for the bow of the boat? How did they get the timber to curve?
Well, the wood that they used was mostly oak for those planks. You remember the earlier slide I have showing the planks being put in place? That was oak, and they'd cut down the tree, and while it was still green, that is before it had been allowed to dry out any, they would cut it into planks. And they didn't use saws, they split it. And then they'd shape it a little bit with axes. And being green wood, it would bend a little bit better. Dry wood is more resistant to bending. And for the sections where it had to bend more, you use shorter pieces of wood and tack them together.
You showed the scene of a Viking boat being built, and it has a lapping of the boards
Yes.
that form the hull. And you said that nails are put to hold the boards together.
That's right.
What kind of waterproofing material or caulking was used to keep the boards from leaking?
They used, as far as we can tell, they used tar and beeswax and pine pitch mixed with some fibrous material to pack that area. And yeah, I'm glad you reemphasized that. These strakes were lapped like shingles on a roof, lapped together, and then they were nailed where the two cross with an iron nail that's sent through and then bent over. And then that caulking you're talking about was put between. I don't know if it was put there before they put the nails in or after. I wasn't there.
Is there evidence in Newfoundland that Vikings were there, or is it mostly speculation?
You know, this is a very active topic, and it seems like every week or so I'm hearing something more. One of the things that has really helped it is DNA, is the ability to detect Viking era DNA, and they found it lots of places they never expected to. So a lot of the evidence is not Viking remains, but simply DNA or some other minor kind of evidence.
In some of the pictures of your raid, which were pretty cool, it looked like some of the boats had head sails or foresails. Yours doesn't, and I certainly don't think of them as having that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're pretty loose on the rules on who participates in the raids. So you see a number of conventionally rigged boats there, and you see a boat like mine which has a balance lug sail, which is kind of a refinement of the square sails that the Vikings used. But that's very observant, and like I say, we allow almost anything.
Can you tell me on their longer voyages what kind of enclosure they had? So when they went on raids, let's say to Ireland or into Brittany, what kind of enclosures were they? Were they tarps or canvas, or did they have wooden enclosures?
As far as we know, we haven't found any evidence of enclosure. I would think there would be some tarps or canvas of some sort, but not even an enclosure like Thor did on the Kon-Tiki. They were out in the elements, amazingly so.
That's pretty hardy for going into Greenland or...
It is pretty hardy. We don't do that on the raid. We go sleep in cabins at night. Barry, there's some... Here we go. Yeah.
What year did the Vikings begin, or do you have a general idea of how old they are?
Well, they say the historians like to say the Viking Age started around 800 and went to about, what'd I say, 1050? Yeah, and I think the 1050 date is when they were starting to become Christianized and maybe behaved a little better. But they were still using these kinds of boats, you know, well past that date. And they probably developed these kinds of boats before that date.
I understand that the Vikings had the chutzpah to sort of take over the Mediterranean. They had the chutzpah to take over the Mediterranean, and they even went down some rivers all the way to Paris, and you know, just had their way over there. and they also established a lot of establishments, you know. Okay. Well, you can't hear me?
Yeah, you're right about about them going as far as Paris. Whether or not they came up from the Mediterranean or down from what would be the Rhine and so forth, I'm not sure. I have some doubts about how much they came through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean, however, because what was it, 7-something, the Muslims who had gone into Spain controlled the Straits of Gibraltar, and I think they were pretty careful about who they let into the Mediterranean. So I think, this is my personal opinion, but I think most of the Vikings that got into Central, Eastern, and even Western Europe came down from the north through the river systems. And remember, these are light boats, and they didn't necessarily all have these 70-foot warships. You know, they may have had smaller ones, 40 or 50 feet. So if you had a crew of 30 people, you could pick that thing up and portage it a couple of miles to the head of the next river system. Other questions?
Norm, I understand that one of the advantages of the double-ended boat was that they could go up narrow rivers and then just go back down the narrow rivers. And this is particularly useful for hitting cathedrals and monasteries.
I agree. Well, they're not as easy to go backwards because the steering position was affixed to the right-hand back of the boat, the starboard, the steering side. But yeah, you could back them up pretty easily, I would think. Anyone else?
Well, you didn't say anything about the Vikings that actually settled where they went, like in Kiev and Dublin and Normandy, and so their influence was widely spread even after the Viking Age.
Oh, absolutely. Like you just mentioned, there's good evidence that they settled Kiev, Ukraine, and of course we know of the Norman conquest throughout the British Isles. There's a lot of Viking blood in Britain. Actually, one of our Villa members, Ron Stevenson, Ron's not here tonight, has traced his lineage. He's been pretty lucky in being able to trace his lineage, and he's traced it back to a Viking in 12 or 1300 something. I don't have the name in front of me, but Roma. Rolla. Rollo. Rollo. Thank you. Yours too? Okay.
Norm, the Viking ship looks a lot like the Greek triunes 1,000 years earlier. Were they copied or?
No, as far as I can tell, there's not much similarity. First of all, those were mostly rowing boats. Yeah, they put up a sail once in a while, but they got their speed from having 3 men on each oar for 6 men per side. And I don't know, I haven't seen how they were built, but I didn't think it was lapstrake. I thought it was another method of building. And of course, the big difference is the Greeks used slaves, and these Vikings who were out on these warring expeditions were going as crew, and their payment was part of the plunder, which was a great incentive to plunder all the harder. You got a percentage of the cargo.
So, Norm, I have a question.
Yeah.
Did they carry any musical instruments such as horns or stringed instruments of any kind?
I didn't see any mention of that. I would think they would, but I didn't see any mention of it in the research I've done so far. Come back next year, I'll tell you.
As I understand it, the reconstructed Greek triremes are notorious for being not particularly stable. How stable were the Viking ships to rolling?
I think well, if they weren't stable, they'd put some rocks on the bottom, give them some ballast. But the fact that they were able to traverse the North Atlantic, even in summertime, tells me they were pretty seaworthy. Of course, we don't know how many got through and how many didn't, because the ones who didn't tell us. But yeah, I think they were relatively stable. That's not to say you could shift from one side to the other easily. You had to know what you were doing. I'm sure they rocked a lot, but I think they were quite seaworthy for an open boat. Okay, one. The toilet facilities. He wants to know about the toilet facilities. He wants to know if they had porta potties. Use your imagination. It was an open boat with a nice gunnel along each side, probably wide enough to sit on. Okay. Frank wants the mic.